Hello everyone, welcome to another Joseki lesson. So we're near the end of the Pincer Josekis, and this last one is really a rabbit hole, by which I mean it leads to a lot of complications. And that is the double approach right here at number 7. So number 5 is the first approach, number 6 is the Pincer, and number 7 right here is the double approach. What does this mean? It means that potentially each of these 4 stones can develop into their own group. And that's going to be really, really complicated. It's definitely going to lead to fights. And of course, there is also the high double approach here, and number 7 on the 4th line. You need to account for both of these approaches. So why is it a rabbit hole? Because you need to consider all these different pincers, right? As we talked about in the previous videos. All of these different pincers will lead to different responses to the double approach. And that's potentially very complicated. Because my videos are mostly for beginners and double-digit Q players or Q players, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining all the details of these Josekis, and I've decided to try to do all of the main variations and the basics in one video instead. Otherwise, we'll be spending at least 2 to 3 hours going through most of these Josekis, or nuances of these different pincers and the low and the high double approaches, right here or here. So it's kind of get, but I'll just introduce the bottom line because these Josekis already involve some patterns we've already seen. In particular, one is the pressing attachment. We're going to see this pattern a lot, right? We're going to see this a lot. Another thing is that it's actually pretty common to the double approach without the pincer, which we'll talk about very soon, actually, here on this channel, right? 5 and 7, without the pincer, what do you do as white in this situation? Or this high double approach at number 7, what do you do as white? Right, so this is actually more common, and white definitely needs to respond, and this will also lead to some complications. As always, I try to do a little bit of advice for beginners because you don't get this kind of advice on Joseki books or in most lectures, right? Most lectures, the teachers just try to march through all these variations, tell you about all the complications, but you don't necessarily know how to avoid these complications or when to simplify things or how to stay alive. Right? So if you're a beginner, if you're black in this situation, I would not recommend playing the double approach. Right? It's a little too fancy for you at this point. As I mentioned earlier, taking the corner by jumping into the 3-3 point here is a great move. Right? Taking the territory increases your chance of winning. Or if you want to experiment with fighting, we talked about jumping out. Right? You're really cutting off 4 and 6, and you can put some pressure on number 6 by playing this counter pincer at number 9. Right? So this is how you start a fight. So if you're black in this situation, if you're a beginner, double-digit Q player, or even single-digit Q player, I would not recommend just routinely playing this unless you figured it out, right? Unless you really enjoy fighting and you know exactly what you're doing. Otherwise, be careful playing this double approach. But what if, right, you're white in this situation, you're like, I'm a beginner, I know I can play the pincer, and your opponent plays this. What do you do, right? So what you can do, usually, right, is this pressing attachment here. Either direction works, right? And also another move that most Joseki books do not cover, but AI doesn't necessarily dislike. It loses you a few points, from 5 to 10 percentage points of winning probability. But for beginners, your main goal is to stay alive. Do not get killed, right? You don't want number 4 or number 6 to get killed and you're at a disadvantage. So the key move here after the double approach is to play at the 3-3 point. And number 4 and number 8, this shape is alive here in the corner. I'll explain this a little bit later, some of these other videos when we talk about the double approach without the pincer, right? And why this is alive. Because it basically boils down to a life and death problem, except it's not a problem because white can make a living shape no matter what black does. So just remember 4 and 8 is a living shape. And that's really important because if you're a beginner, after playing this and after understanding why it's living, all you need to worry about is number 6, which is relatively easier, right? So black will try to do something like this, and white, of course, can try to break out. So number 9 is the correct move, but black cannot contain white. White can push twice in this situation, and number 5 and 11 are cut off and will be killed. So this is not okay for black. So what black should do instead is to put some pressure on number 6 here, and white will be able to break out with number 14 and 16 here. right? So it's a pretty nice shape for white. But according to AI, right, black should play another move here, and white should play another move on the left side. So this is slightly better for black, this situation, but it's definitely playable for white. And of course, number 8 here is a little slow. It could be better elsewhere, right, at D18, even E18, the corner is still secure, but it's definitely playable for white if you're worried about getting into fights. So that's number 8 right here. Of course, if you're black in this situation, you can also play this move. I'm sorry if this whole video is disorganized because there's so many moves to cover, and I just cover the main ones. It might be a little light on explanations, but I think in the future, when I'm done covering all the basic Joseki videos, which might be in another year or two here on my channel, I'll come back to these and explain some of the more nuanced, more complicated fights for higher level amateur players. So if you're a beginner, bear with me on this because it just has to be really brief. It's not worth it for us to spend hours on this when you don't really use this in actual games, right? So number 9 right here, this pressing attachment against number 6, this works. And now white has a couple of choices. You can take care of this cutting point. Black can play this, right? Now black is not really afraid of this cut. Black can fight relatively easily, I would say. Or white can keep coming out, right? And coming out is always important. Of course, black will cut here and take number 6. It will be something like this. Of course, what you do as white now, you can play this, take care of this group, or you can play a pincer against number 7, right? So lots of choices, but relatively peaceful. And you're black, right? Number 8 is kind of a trick move. You should be careful. You can't just jump. If you jump, then number 10 will kind of take care of number 5 here, right? If you want to save number 5, this is definitely not okay, right? You just cannot crawl on the second line, make a living shape. So this is definitely not okay for black, even if it lives. So if number 5 is taken this way, then this is not good for black. If you jump this way, also not great because white can just break out, right? So number 8 is actually a good trick move for a lot of amateur players because black doesn't really know how to respond. They know this, but there's a tendency for amateur players to block here at number 13, and doesn't work, right, as we've seen before. So black needs to play this move, which most amateurs don't know about. And this is the actual variation after number 8. What about other variations, right? We talked about this briefly. The idea, right, if white doesn't cover the 3-3 points, the idea is for black to jump in, right? It would be something like this. Or white can cover this side. This is simpler. But this doesn't really work for white because, of course, white has sente. But the thing is, number 5 is not dead, right? Number 5 is still alive. And if number 5 is alive, what is white's shape for? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for white. So this definitely favors black. So that's why usually white blocks from this side and black will have to crawl here and white can just connect. And it'll be something like this, right? Black has to connect. White probably plays something like this. So white has a very solid wall on the outside and black has a stone pretty close to the wall. Not in a great position, but of course black can play something like this. And it's okay for both sides. The corner is not that big because number 14, black is still a weak group and the wall is fairly strong. So this is okay as a Joseki. And the idea is similar, right? If black plays something like this, probably worse, I would say. Probably just connect here. And of course, if you're white, it's important to take care of this cutting point, but also you can play some kind of a pincer against number 7. So you got choices here. And that's number 10, right? Blocking from this side. But the basic idea is for black to come into the 3-3 point after number 7. And the classic Joseki, of course, is for black to play this exchange first, and then play this attachment underneath. And now white will take care of number 5, black comes into the corner. This is a classic Joseki, right? So, but compared to one of the previous patterns we saw, black made this exchange with 9 and 10, and this doesn't favor black, right? This doesn't favor black, so that's why now black prefers to jump in first, hoping white plays this, and now this is a much better pattern for black. And of course, one of the pitfalls, things to look out for, is after this, even if you're an amateur player, you might be able to see this variation, right? You can Atari here first, white must extend, and now you can sacrifice number 5, it seems like. You might even get this Atari, which is great. And then all of a sudden, it seems like you can take care of number 4, right? Something like this. This actually doesn't work because white can play this and still come into the corner, right? So maybe black can play this. Right. So the question for amateurs, especially beginners and double-digit Q players, would be who has an advantage after this variation? Intuitively, you might think black, because the corner is huge, almost 15 points, right? And the corner is pretty solid. And if you look at white, white doesn't have a whole lot. But the answer here is actually it favors white by quite a lot. By quite a lot. Why? Because white is so solid on the outside. If you count the potential for white, it's actually definitely more than 15 points on the outside. And because of black's shape here, black can easily be enclosed, right? So black is actually not in a good position here after sacrificing the stone and taking the corner. So this is one of the pitfalls, I would say, for many amateur players. If you're black, you should not play this variation because it doesn't favor you, even if it seems like you've taken a large corner, right? But white is simply too solid on the outside. It's not that intuitive, but this is the conclusion that we've come to, and this is what AI says as well. So it's about a more than a 20-point percentage change in winning probability when black chose to play here at number 11, right, and go through with this variation compared to this classic Joseki, right? This way, black is much better off. So that's this, and then there's always this pressing attachment in this direction, and this is where some of the things we talked about in the series of videos covering the pressing attachment without the pincer, without the double approach, right? This will apply, right? Something like this. So, of course, black will play the hane here, white will play this extension, and black has choices, right? Something like this, or even the 3-3 points. So it's going to get complicated. Not going to try to cover all of them, but the basic idea will be very similar to the pressing attachment without the pincer, without the double approach. So now what about the high one-space pincer? And as we've mentioned before in some of these videos, this is a very rare pincer that no one should play because the easiest way to play against number 6 is to just take the corner, and repeating myself here a little bit, because after all these exchanges, number 6 is simply at the wrong spot, right? It's not taking care of number 5 that easily, right? You need another move, but number 6 is extremely redundant here, right? It's better off like a couple spots to the right, right? So that's why number 6 should not be played, and you're probably not going to see this ever. And of course, one thing to remember is that if you're black in this situation, you should not play the double approach because number 6 is the perfect setup for number 8. And now white is connected, and black will be kind of pressed on the third line. So this is definitely not okay for black. So if you're black, you just have to take the corner, or if you want to fight in some situations, you jump out, right, and cut off 4 and 6. So that's number 6. The high one-space pincer, the double approach doesn't really exist because it's a nice setup for number 8 right here. What about the low 2-space pincer? Of course, black still has this, and these moves will stay the same mostly. You can still play this, so still be a fight. You still have this move, of course. You also have this move. Right now, you can't really cut. Doesn't necessarily favor white, so that's why I think it's probably better for white to come out this way, and it's going to get complicated. Not even going to try to cover all of these variations in this video. It's just an intro. And AI is actually suggesting this move, which I don't understand. It's not really a human move. Definitely didn't exist, to my knowledge, before the age of AI. But this is what AI is suggesting these days, or even something like this as well. Right? It's kind of anticipating the 3-3 invasion. So this way, if it's something like this, then number 8 is a nice move, right? It's a nice spot, kind of capping number 5. It's hard for number 5 to escape. But theoretically, it can, right? But it's going to be a very tough fight for black, right? So it's probably not worth it, right? Even if white plays it here, number 16 and number 18, this already benefits white a lot. Because if black has to play a number 19, really ugly shape, very inefficient, 15, 17, 19, terrible shape. White already benefited a lot from just these 2 exchanges. So it's probably not worth it for black to try to pull out number 5 after this variation. And that's what number 8 is for, right? It's kind of anticipating the 3-3 invasion. And I don't exactly understand what this is for. Probably also for the same reason, right? So we've seen this before, right? It's kind of a 3-3 invasion with a jumping into the 3-3 point and settling the shape. We're going to see this again, of course, in one of these Josekis on the 3-3 invasion to the start point, right? This is how you settle the shape. It's just that number 5, 6, and 8 is kind of an addition to the shape. And of course, number 8 is also at a nice spot here. Right? So I think that's the rationale for number 8. But of course, black has many other moves that can lead to many fights. And we'll try to cover those sometime later, maybe in a year or two. And of course, there's the high 2-space pincer. Again, I would recommend beginners to just take the corner territory. But if you run into this, again, you have a few choices. The 3-3 is always a fallback. You're alive, and your opponent is in 2 groups, and your opponent will have to scramble as black. But of course, you can also play these, right? These moves, again, they also separate 5 and 7. That's what it does. And it makes sure that white does not get enclosed, right? So that's what these moves are for. So these moves, again, they exist. And now, this is a classic Joseki, I think. So very similar to one of the low 1-space pincer Josekis we saw earlier. Black taking in the corner, and white having a little bit of territory here. But number 5 and 9 are not completely dead, right? If black has stones on the outside sometime in the future, these 2 stones can be saved potentially, and white might be under attack. But white is okay for now, right? Because there's nothing surrounding white here on the upper side. So this is a classic Joseki. And of course, AI is suggesting this move, right? This is AI's favorite move. Again, it's anticipating black's 3-3 invasion. It'll be something like this. And number 8 is at the perfect spot, similar to one of the previous patterns we saw, when it's the low 2-space pincer. And lastly, let's talk about the low 3-space pincer. So this is already pretty far from number 5, right? So this double approach is actually a good move for black to play in this situation, even though, once again, if you're a beginner, just take the corner, But this is going to be something like this, right? So it's a double approach, but black will try to take the corner. It's already alive. And number 6, its value is reduced by black taking the corner this way, right? Because number 6 is not helping to surround territory here on the upper left. Right? So this is why it favors black. But of course, this shape on the outside right here is a very strong shape for white. Right? White has a very strong position here. That's what white gets. And number 6, the value of number 6 is reduced by black taking the corner. So that's the idea. This is the basic Joseki after number 7 in the low 3-space pincer. But of course, there are so many other moves you can try, and we're not going to get into the rabbit hole. And the high 3-space pincer is actually pretty popular, at least now in the age of AI. A lot of professionals play this. AI likes this move as well. And of course, again, just repeating myself a little bit, this still exists. And number 6 on the 4th line is actually better than on the 3rd line. Right? Do you see the difference? Because it's actually easier for white to make a connection. If you're a beginner, 16 is a good move. Or you can play something like this, right? It's just more forceful. It connects better with its shape if it's on the 4th line compared to the 3rd line. So that maybe that's why AI prefers this move to the low 3-space pincer. But we're not likely to see these pincers as beginners. Again, the most common pincer is the low 1-space pincer, which adds the maximum pressure on number 5 here. I know it's already a lot, but let's just talk very, very briefly about the high double approach on the 4th line. Right, so this also exists. Not as popular as the lower one, because AI prefers the lower one, right? And that's why most people play the lower one. But the high double approach also exists. And what should white do? So again, we can play this move. It doesn't really change that much, right? This is still a Joseki, just that the position number 7 changed. Slightly better for black, actually, compared to the 3rd line. Because what black wants to do after this pattern is to sacrifice 1 more, but you gain 2 more liberties here, and you get to play this Atari. And number 9 is not completely dead, and black has a nice shape on the outside. Or at least it prevents white from developing into the center, right? So white's shape is relatively redundant here. So that's the idea for number 7. White, if you're really nervous, you can still play this, but not as good, because black can enclose white this way. And this way, white will not be at an advantage after cutting, right? So that's the difference number 7 makes. It makes number 8 a slightly worse move than before. And of course, there's this move, which is relatively new. I think it's most likely an AI invention. Of course, I can imagine human players playing this before, but it's gotten more popular since AI but it's more when the pincer is farther away, we play this move. So usually, again, it's this pressing attachment or this attachment, and number 8. So that's going to get quite complicated, but we'll cover this move. We'll cover these moves when we talk about the double approach without the pincer, which will come up very soon. So that's the basic idea for the double approach. Fairly complicated, as you can see, many options, and many of these options will lead to complications. And I didn't even try to show some of the more complicated variations. So again, to make things simple, this is a basic introduction. I know it's a little disorganized, so please bear with me. But I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. These are the basic things you need to know as a beginner, as a double-digit Q player, or even as a single-digit Q player about the double approach against these various pincers. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Good luck, and thank you for watching.